to another week. I'm Dr. Betsy Greenleaf, your host. And today I'm so excited. We're going to be talking with Dr. Lisa Coach. She is a triple board certified doctor and has so much training behind her. And I can't wait to just get into what she does and why she does it and some things that can help you with your life. So thank you, Dr. Lisa, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So you're triple board certified. What are your board certifications in?
So my primary board certification is internal medicine. So I've had a very busy primary care practice for over 20 years. And I also have anti-aging regenerative medicine and obesity medicine as additional things that I had sought out for post-training.
Those all go so well hand in hand, especially with the obesity epidemic that we're having in the United States and with, just aging
Absolutely.
and disease. How did you end up in this field of work?
Well, interestingly, I ended up in the exact opposite, which was I ended up sick. So I think many of us that excel really do have our own personal journeys, but mine is a little bit unique in that it happened when I was 15. So I was sort of put on my path before I had any other choice. Diagnosed with childhood leukemia, despite feeling totally fine. I was at a camp physical and went through the last 3 years of high school with a big red steroid face and a wig and on continuous antibiotics and birth control pills. I was having procedures every 3 weeks, whether they were bone marrow biopsies or interspinal chemo. So it was pretty rough. And then when all of my hair had grown back, I went for my first ever pap smear. They found a mass on my ovary and realized that actually some of the leukemic cells had hidden there. So I had to start my chemo over again rapidly, and my parents kind of freaked out. We ended up at Sloan Kettering in New York, and there was a lot of very divine intervention. So I always have believed since the beginning that everything happened to me for a reason, that there was a purpose. I didn't really understand it at 15, but when I started the chemo all over again, I went into heart failure, and that was pretty crazy. And at the time, my uncle was a podiatrist, started sending me supplements, and this was back, over 20 years ago. Longer than that at this point, but anyway, probably 25. I didn't know what they were, but I just kept taking them, and it was CoQ10 and carnitine, and they were on auto ship. So that was kind of my first introduction to some integrative things. So I thought at the time I wanted to treat other kids that had been through this. I wanted to understand why I got sick. And it's really funny about my interview for medical school. He was sort of a family friend, the guy who interviewed me for the first interview. And he looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, pediatric oncology, so I can help kids." And he looked at me and he said, "You don't want to do that." And then I was like, wait, you're right. I don't want to do that. I want nobody to ever have to do what I just have had to do. So I went the opposite way, which was in prevention, and prevention of cardiovascular disease was one of my main interests. So that's how I kind of got turned on to how I chose internal medicine and got turned on to both obesity and regenerative medicine.
That is amazing. And I know you've done so much other like training beyond what regular doctors do. And so tell me a little bit more about the spiritual aspect of disease, because we don't usually think about that in traditional, Western medicine. So
Absolutely. So I described that sort of inner knowing when I was diagnosed, and I did pretty well for about till I had my daughter. So for about 10, 12 years after that second kind of interaction with chemo. And then when I had my daughter, I got Hashimoto's and psoriasis, and they told me I needed eye surgery and I had to have sinus surgery, and I was really kind of a mess. And I was already studying some integrative medicine and nutrition because I wasn't getting answers in traditional medicine. So I knew had to be more. And I knew that it was suddenly becoming my own personal job to figure that out. So I went into some of these other trainings and I got exposed to something called muscle testing. So for any of the listeners, I don't know if you know what muscle testing is, Betsy, but it is, it's pretty fascinating. It's usually done by naturopaths. And I had a friend who was going to close her practice because she was exhausted. She went to Arizona. They said, "You guys have a guru 30 minutes from Tampa." So I went to go see him. And at the point that he was kind of touching on different, acupuncture points and pushing on my arm, and I was sitting there going, "You have got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous." But at the same time, he sat me across the desk from him. So mind you, and for anybody that's listening to this, you probably have been through some of this. Like I had been I went ahead and went the traditional route too, because I felt so bad, right? I had been to the eye specialist, I'd been to the gynecologist because I was having problems there. I had been to the ENT. I'd been everywhere. So I was pretty much open at that point when I saw there was no real answer there. And I was doing a lot of my nutrition and some supplements and not getting better. So when he was pulling on my arm and he sat me across the desk from him, he looked at me. And whereas all these other doctors had said, everything looks great, and they couldn't find anything, he looked at me and literally said, "How are you functioning?" So there I was, seeing that there's some other techniques and technologies that are not, like, we don't understand. There's not evidence-based science behind, but he could see me. He could see what I knew was going on in my body. So that was probably where it first started to open the doors, that there was way more than just the modalities that I had learned. So we went ahead and he treated me with lots of different supplements and different regimens, and I got better. And so not all the way, but maybe about 60% better. Started sending my patients to him. And then the next modality came in. And so I did all of these things until about 5 years ago. I was already plugged into how emotions could be tied into illness. I was studying the chakras and a lot of kind of different types of energy healing modalities through these different training programs I was taking. But the true, like, absolute shift was when I had been doing fairly well and was in a lot of stress at home, a lot of stress at work. I was able to have a second kid 8 years apart because my crash after my daughter. So I had a second kid at 41 with one ovary, 5 years of chemo, and no fertility support. So I knew that then that there was higher purpose and that kid really wanted to be here. But he had to be delivered under emergency general cardiac anesthesia because my heart gave out. So he's now 11. My heart was able to rebound with a lot of shifting into some knowledge of heart coherence and what else was I missing spiritually. But then 5 years ago, it gave out completely. So then the heart transplant doctor was in the room. They were talking about that for me. And I was laying in the bed and I literally just asked, what else do you want? I serve people all day. I have this booming practice with 8,000 patients. I've got this, it's combined, collaborative, innovative clinic. And all I do is serve. Like, what am I missing? And the message loud and clear was, you are missing yourself. So it was a complete 180 because I was able to get out with just a biventricular pacemaker. So I didn't have to be on the transplant list, thank God. Now my heart is pretty much healed. I can run, I can do whatever I want for the most part. And so much of that has been really digging into the spirituality and traumas and experiences behind illness, really studying that and addressing it.
This is incredibly amazing. And I want to get further into this when we come back from the commercial break.
80% of women will develop a pelvic health condition at some point in their lives. There is relief. There is hope. The Pelvic Floor Store, your resource for personal health.
All right. And we're back with Dr. Lisa Coach. Thank you once again. I'm really interested. So you've gone through all these things in your life. How then have you taken the information that you've learned to apply it to your patients?
Well, when I walk in a room or get on a Zoom with a patient, it's always in the back of my mind in terms of understanding where their illnesses may have occurred in relation to what was going on in their lives. So my intake is I always tell them we're going to start at the beginning. And every single time it'll be like, oh, and I forgot, yes, that. So just asking about life circumstances, especially early childhood traumas. It doesn't have to be as extreme as sexual abuse or physical abuse. It could be, being pulled back and forth between divorced parents or anything, getting lost when you're 2. There can be traumas that can hang out. And then if you track, it's almost like a fun game of chasing, like just tracking where the symptoms began and looking at what maybe had occurred. So for example, I'll have patients who had I saw a woman just yesterday. So she was a new patient. She has had a lot of memory issues and she's pretty young. And she also has a lot of anxiety. Well, when we go back into her history, it was literally oh yeah, I had 2 concussions. I forgot about that, when I was cheering in 8th grade, something, so, and then she was like, and then I started to get paranoid about doing doing the cheerleading. So I gave it up, going back to that and saying, let's revisit this. So not only are we going to treat the physical, that recommend some things for, the brain and hyperbaric and whatever supplementation, but it was, can we go into understanding that this fear-based concept that got triggered from the trauma is still behind what the symptoms are having that you're having today. So I do have an arsenal of places that I'll refer people to. Working with a practitioner in Orlando that has a patent pending 4-hour program that helps to stop the loops of trauma. So we are actually bringing that in, and that can be done in a group setting. There's a couple people online, so I can give these resources to your listeners that have some nervous system regulation programs that are very, very impactful. But then you can do something just as simple as this book that we chatted about real quick before we got on, called You Can Heal Your Life. This is a pretty famous book by a spiritual woman named Louise Hay, who started her own publishing house. And she had a lot of trauma early on, but she goes through different illnesses. So something as simple as pimples. So everybody that's listening to this can relate to pimples. So it literally says pimples and what the thought pattern that likely led to having it. So this whole thing doesn't even take into account the actual physical side, which, so the best, let's just say this again, that the best is when you combine both, right? But small outbursts of anger are likely to cause it. And then one of the affirmations to calm it down is, I calm my thoughts and I am serene. Well, what's really interesting when you understand the physiological causes of pimples, a lot of times it is cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So this is a practitioner who's been able to tap into multiple illnesses. And there's several books about this to show very specific things, like if you hurt your knee or if you hurt your shoulder, what else may be going on behind the scenes. So a lot of times my patients haven't thought about the spiritual or emotional or energetic frequencies that may be also pulling them down or keeping them stuck in whatever problem that they're having.
How would you combat people who are like, oh, this is crazy, it's too woo-woo, it's out there?
Yeah.
Because, I get that sometimes when I'm trying to bring the spiritual aspect into health and wellness.
So I think that people are only ready for what they're ready to face. So a lot of times when people get pretty put off by this discussion, it'll end up being my patients that have the most trauma. And it's much easier to just call it woo or stay on the outside of it. And I just respect everybody wherever they are. So if it's in the setting of a patient, then I may just say something simple like, can I get you grounded in the earth and turn on a guided meditation that's free on YouTube? It may just be that, that small of an intervention. And then they get some space, then they're ready for the next conversation. If it's somebody on more of a professional level, I don't ever kind of push this. So I'll just say, if you ever have questions about my experience or what I've had with my patients, I'm happy to share.
And I think, I always tell patients that health is like a 3-legged stool, body, mind, and spirit. That's what, the show's called. And you could be in the best physical shape, you're eating the perfect diet, you're exercising all the time, but you're still like unhealthy because if you don't have those other areas in balance, it's like that stool will tip over.
Well, and what's super exciting is I think, what's happening in medicine right now is we're understanding that more. So there's more science coming out. We have more technology. So we can look at actually areas of the brain and how well they're being perfused and know that in trauma, even if it wasn't massive, we know that you can be bleeding energy. So these loops can be going on, making you feel like you're still in the stressful event. That can, no matter what you do, like you just said, the highest level of supplements, the fanciest peptides, the highest level of stem cells, spending all this money, which is another point I make with my patients every single day. You don't want to go into performance therapies, which is actually one of my favorite things to do with people, until you've healed the basics. So it may be something as basic physically as the gut and thyroid and adrenals and hormones, but it could also very well and almost always be getting to the root cause of some of these spiritual or emotional loops that may be still playing or affecting you energetically.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it's funny because I was thinking back, I had this one case not too long ago where this woman had cancer, and we were trying to go back into her history. And I don't even do this area of medicine, but it was funny. I felt drawn to ask her. It was September when she was getting diagnosed. And I was trying to figure out, and I felt drawn to ask her, like, what happened in July? And she's like, why do you ask me that? I said, no, I have this feeling that something happened in July that's now triggering this thing that we're finding in September. And she had the death of her dog, which was incredibly emotionally traumatic. And I still to this day haven't been able to put like the two and two together. But there's because I had known her for years and she had been really healthy. And then all of a sudden her health just kind of took this turn in September.
Yeah,
And
well, I'll share just a really fast what I went on I'm training in intuitive and healing arts. So as you open and as your listeners open more to just feeling into like what the hit you got about July, we all have these kind of inner knowledges and intuition, and many of us just stay too busy to access them, which is again why very often my first step is grounding and meditating. But one of the events I went to is a very well-established shaman in Sedona, and she had a group of women and we were all there, and she asked us, do you know what happens with breast cancer? Why so many people are getting breast cancer? And so it's like, the phthalates and the poor diet. And, and she's like, sure, but it's really this. And she grabbed her breasts and she said, does anybody else want a suck? Because it was harsh, but it was the over giving frequency that women have, right? Where we are just giving, giving, giving without any receiving, and we're expected to be everything. And then we just stay out of our body and we don't have the self-care. So that's just a more extreme example, but there are lots for all the different types of presentations that our body gives us. It's very often our body is just trying to get our attention.
that is really amazing. And I can even think about my own health. Like when I was right outside of college, started college was very stressful for me. And I didn't know how to express that stress. And I found myself all of a sudden very, very sick. And nobody could figure it out. Like, why are you so sick? And doing all these tests. And it really wasn't until I was able to kind of express those emotions and learn how to chill out that those illnesses went away and never came back for me.
So
So
often, and that can be a big sign. So if you're somebody who has struggled and you've gone and sought help, and definitely there is an issue with traditional medicine not being able to achieve or find everything. But the truth is, how most practitioners are practicing functional and integrative medicine, it'll dig a little bit deeper, but it's still not addressing what I believe to be one of the absolute biggest pieces, which is this energetic, spiritual trauma history cause that can be pulling all of our systems down.
this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Where can people find out more about you?
So I have a book on Amazon called Get Lit. I am at Dr. Lisa Coach on my website, my Instagram, and my Facebook.
That is wonderful. And Coach, just to let you know, is if you're listening to this and not watching it, it's Koche. So
Yeah.
that's Dr. Lisa Coach, and actually go find her book on Amazon. And when you're checking out all her areas on Instagram and Facebook and all those social medias, and her checking out her website, don't forget to also check me out at Dr. Betsy Greenleaf or Dr. Betsy Greenleaf _. And more importantly, make sure you share, like, and follow both of us, and tune back in next week for another show. Once again, thank you so much, Lisa, for being with us today.
Thank you so much.